Commander Yuna pressed her palms against the cold metal railing of the observation deck aboard the Kepler, Alliance flagship Harmony's Edge. The tactical display before her painted a nightmare in holographic red. 3 more star systems had vanished from Alliance control in just 7 days. Each crimson marker represented not just territory lost, but billions of lives now trapped under Vorthan rule. The bridge hummed with desperate activity. Officers moved between stations with the frantic energy of people watching their world collapse. Yuna had seen this before during the siege of her home colony on Nexus Prime. The same hollow eyes, the same trembling hands on control panels, the same weight of impending doom pressing down on everyone's shoulders. "Commander, incoming transmission from the Deneb sector," Lieutenant Minho called out from his communications station. His uniform was wrinkled from 3 straight days on duty, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "It's Admiral Chen from the Starlight Guardian." Yuna nodded grimly and activated the holographic display. Admiral Chen's weathered face materialized, but something was wrong. Burns covered half his features, and his left arm hung limp at his side. "Yuna, thank the void you're alive," Chen's voice crackled through the damaged transmission. "The Vorthons hit us with everything they had. We lost 43 ships in the first wave alone. They're not taking prisoners anymore. They're executing entire crews in front of our eyes before destroying the ships." The bridge fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Yuna felt ice form in her stomach. The Vorthans had always been ruthless, but this was something new, something darker. "What's your status, Admiral?" Yuna asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "We're running on emergency power with maybe 6 hours of life support left. The Vorthans are using some kind of new weapon technology. Our shields might as well be made of paper. Commander, they're not just conquering anymore, they're exterminating." Transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in suffocating silence. Yuna stared at the empty space where Chin's image had been, her mind racing through every tactical scenario she could imagine. None of them ended well. Captain Juan approached from the tactical station, his face pale. As the Alliance's chief strategist, he had run the numbers a dozen times, hoping for different results. "Commander, I've analyzed our remaining forces. Even if we combine every ship from all member species, we're outnumbered 15-1. The Vorthons have been building their fleet for centuries while we focused on exploration and trade." Yuna turned back to the tactical display, watching the red markers continue their slow but unstoppable advance toward the core Alliance worlds. Her home planet of Kepler 4 was only 3 jumps away from the front lines now, less than 2 weeks. Her family would be facing the same fate as Admiral Chen's crew. "What about the defensive platforms around our major worlds?" she asked, grasping for any hope. "The Vorthans have some kind of siege-breaker technology," Juan replied, pulling up battle footage on a side display. "Watch this recording from the Arcturus system." The hologram showed a massive Vorthon dreadnought approaching one of the Alliance's most heavily fortified defensive stations. The platform bristled with plasma cannons and missile arrays, enough firepower to level a small moon. But as they watched, the Vorthan ship deployed what looked like a swarm of metallic insects. The tiny objects swarmed over the defensive platform, and within minutes, explosions erupted across its surface. The entire structure collapsed in on itself like a house of cards. "Nanodisruptors," G1 explained, "they eat through our hull. Materials at the molecular level? Our scientists estimate it would take decades to develop countermeasures." Lieutenant Sujin from the intelligence station suddenly straightened in her chair. "Commander, what about the humans?" The suggestion hung in the air like a desperate prayer. Every officer on the bridge turned to look at her. Humans were still considered the galaxy's newest arrivals, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 18 months ago. Most species viewed them as primitive mammals who had stumbled into space through luck rather than skill. The humans? Captain Juan frowned. "Sujin, they barely have a dozen ships. Their technology is generations behind even our oldest vessels." "But they have something we don't," Sujin insisted, pulling up data files on her screen. "Our xenobiologists have been studying their history since first contact. These humans have been fighting wars among themselves for thousands of years. They understand conflict in ways we never had to learn." Yuna moved closer to examine the files. Images of human conflicts filled the display. Massive armies clashing across continents, aerial battles involving hundreds of aircraft. Naval engagements with ships larger than some Alliance vessels. The scale of their warfare was staggering. Look at this, Sujin continued, highlighting specific records. In their most recent global conflict, they mobilized over 100 million soldiers. They built weapons capable of destroying entire cities. They fought on every continent of their planet simultaneously for 6 years. The bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. Most Alliance species had achieved peace centuries ago, resolving conflicts through negotiation and compromise. The idea of warfare on such a scale was alien to them. But their ships? Guan protested. We've seen their fleet, crude fusion drives, basic energy weapons, minimal shielding. Maybe that's not what matters, Yuna said quietly, studying the human military records. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. Keep trying to match the Vorthan ship for ship, technology for technology. But what if the answer isn't better equipment? What if it's better tactics? She made her decision with the weight of billions of lives pressing down on her shoulders. The Alliance had tried everything else. Diplomacy had failed when the Vorthons executed the peace negotiators. Defensive strategies collapsed under their superior firepower. Guerrilla warfare only delayed the inevitable. Lieutenant Minho, open a priority channel to Earth, Yuna commanded. Send a formal request to their Terran Defense Council. Tell them the Kepler Alliance requests moderate military assistance against the Vorthan Empire. As Minho began composing the message, Yuna wondered if she was making the right choice. The humans were untested, unknown, possibly too primitive to make any difference. But as she watched the red markers continue their advance across the tactical display, she realized they were out of conventional options. The message was transmitted within the hour, carrying with it the desperate hope of 47 Alliance species. None of them could have imagined what would arrive in response to their call for help. They had asked for moderate assistance, expecting perhaps a handful of patrol ships and some military advisors. They were about to learn that humans had a very different definition of backup. Vorthan Fleet Admiral Krex stood on the command bridge of his flagship Dark Conquest, a massive dreadnought that had destroyed countless worlds across the galaxy. His 6 arms worked the control panels with practiced ease, while his 4 eyes studied the tactical display. 47 star systems had fallen under his command during his long military career. Each victory had been swift, decisive, and brutal. Admiral, our scouts report the human fleet has entered the Rigel system, announced his tactical officer, a younger Vorthon with the eager bloodlust typical of their species. 200 of their primitive vessels are moving toward our position. Krex's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his kind. Humans were the galaxy's newest joke, mammals who had barely crawled out of their gravity well. 18 months ago, their ships looked like metal boxes held together with primitive welding. Powered by simple fusion reactors that most civilized species had abandoned centuries ago. Display their fleet composition, Krex ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. The holographic display showed the approaching human vessels in detail. The largest ships were maybe half the size of a standard Vorthon cruiser. Their hulls were angular and crude, lacking the elegant curves and advanced materials of proper warships. No energy shielding that he could detect, minimal armor plating and weapon systems that looked like they belonged in a museum. Look at these pathetic creatures, Krex sneered, pointing at the display with one of his clawed appendages. They're bringing playground toys to fight the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. This will be over before our secondary guns have time to warm up. His bridge crew chittered with amusement. The Vorthons had conquered races with technology far superior to what these humans possessed. Species with energy shields that could absorb star-level radiation, weapons that could crack planets, and ships that moved faster than anything in known space. All had fallen before Vorthan might. Admiral, incoming transmission from the human fleet, the communications officer reported. They're requesting our immediate surrender. The entire bridge erupted in laughter. Krex's 4 eyes glowed with murderous joy. Surrender? These mammals want us to surrender? Send them our response? Total annihilation. At exactly 14:30 ship time, Krex gave the order that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his short life. All ships, attack formation. Full speed ahead. We'll crush these primitives and use their wreckage to decorate our victory monuments. The Vorthan fleet moved forward in their traditional battle formation, a massive wedge designed to concentrate firepower and break through enemy lines. 200 ships strong, bristling with plasma cannons and antimatter torpedoes. They advanced like an unstoppable tide of destruction. Captain Seogen watched the approaching battle from the Alliance observation. Vessel's silent witness, positioned at a safe distance from the combat zone. As the Alliance's military observer, he had seen dozens of fleet engagements, but something felt different about this one. The human ships weren't retreating or forming defensive positions like every other species did when facing the Vorthons. Instead, they were spreading out. Lieutenant Minho, are you recording all sensor data? Seogen asked his communications officer. Yes, sir. Full spectrum analysis on all channels, Minho replied, his fingers dancing across the control panel. Captain, the human ships are moving into some kind of formation I've never seen before. It looks almost like ... double quotes like what? They're setting up a trap. The first Vorthan energy blasts lit up space like artificial stars. Massive plasma bolts that could vaporize asteroids streaked toward the human fleet. But something impossible happened. The human ships weren't there anymore. They had scattered in all directions, moving with a coordination that defied explanation. How are they moving like that? Seogen whispered, watching the tactical display in amazement.
I know.
Species coordinates fleet movements with that level of precision. The answer came in the form of human return fire. Instead of the crude kinetic weapons and primitive lasers everyone expected, the human ships unleashed hell itself. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than stellar cores carved through Vorthan hulls like they were made of thin metal. Kinetic bombardment. Systems launched projectiles at relativistic speeds, turning enemy ships into expanding clouds of superheated gas. But the most terrifying weapons were something the humans. It's called quantum torpedoes. These devices didn't just explode, they seemed to tear holes in reality itself, creating miniature black holes that consumed everything within a kilometer radius before collapsing back into normal space. By the void, Lieutenant Minho gasped, his face pale as he watched the sensor readings. Captain, those aren't primitive weapons. Their technology is beyond anything in our databases. Admiral Krex realized too late that he had made a fatal error. These weren't the crude mammals his intelligence reports had described. The human ships moved like a single organism, each vessel anticipating the other's movements with supernatural precision. They didn't fight like civilized species who engaged in honorable combat. They fought like predators. The Vorthans found themselves surrounded without understanding how it had happened. Human ships appeared on all sides, their formations flowing, and adapting like liquid mercury. Every time the Vorthan fleet tried to concentrate their firepower, the humans were already somewhere else, striking from unexpected angles. Admiral, we're taking massive casualties, his tactical officer screamed over the sound of explosions echoing through the ship's hull. The Blood, Thunder, and World Eater have been destroyed. The humans are targeting our command ships first. Watched in horror as his carefully planned battle formation disintegrated into chaos, Vorthan ships exploded one after another, their advanced shields useless against weapons that seemed to operate on principles beyond current understanding. The humans weren't just fighting, they were systematically dismantling his fleet with the cold efficiency of professional killers. They're hunting us, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. This isn't a battle, it's an execution. Captain Seogen felt his stomach drop as he watched the massacre unfold. The human ships moved through the Vorthan fleet, like sharks through a school of fish. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no honor in their tactics. When Vorthon vessels tried to signal surrender, broadcasting the universal peace signals recognized by every civilized species, the humans ignored them completely. Captain, multiple Vorthon ships are trying to surrender, Lieutenant Minho reported, his voice shaking. The humans aren't responding to any of the surrender protocols. They can't hear the signals, Seogen asked, though he already suspected the terrible truth. No, sir. They're receiving the transmissions. They're just ... ignoring them. Display Seogen watched as human ships methodically destroyed every Vorthon vessel that tried to give up. No prisoners were taken. No mercy was shown. The humans continued firing until each enemy ship was nothing but scattered. Debris floating in the void of space. Admiral Krex's flagship shuddered under a direct hit from 3 quantum torpedoes simultaneously. The bridge filled with smoke and the screams of dying crew members. With his ship falling apart around him, Krex finally understood what his species had awakened. These weren't primitive mammals stumbling through space. These were apex predators who had evolved in a crucible of constant warfare. Retreat. Screamed into his communications array. All ships, emergency jump. Retreat immediately. Of the 200 Vorthon ships that had entered the Rigel system with such confidence, only 7 managed to escape into hyperspace. The rest were nothing but glowing wreckage. Testimony to the terrible efficiency of human warfare. The battle that Admiral Krex had expected to last minutes ended at exactly 16:15 ship time. In less than 2 hours, the humans had completely destroyed one of the largest Vorthon fleets ever assembled. Captain Seogen sat in stunned silence as the human fleet reformed into perfect battle formation, ready for the next engagement. He finally understood why the Alliance's desperate call for help had been answered so completely. The humans hadn't come to fight alongside them. They had come to show the galaxy what real warfare looked like. Commander Yuna stepped through the airlock of the human flagship Iron Resolve and immediately felt the difference. Unlike Alliance vessels with their soft lighting and curved corridors designed for comfort, this ship felt like a weapon itself. The hallways were straight and functional, lined with blast-resistant metal panels. The air hummed with the constant vibration of massive engines and weapon systems. 2 weeks had passed since the massacre at Rigel system, and the Terran war fleet had moved through space like an unstoppable force of nature. 5 star systems that had been under Vorthon control for months were now free, their orbital defenses reduced to floating scrap metal. The speed of the human advance was beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Commander Yuna, welcome aboard. Admiral Taiho greeted her at the entrance to the command center. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to calculate the tactical value of everything they looked at. His uniform was spotless, but practical, designed for function rather than ceremony. The command center of the Iron Resolve was unlike anything in the Alliance fleet. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing real-time data from hundreds of ships across dozens of star systems. Officers moved between stations with military precision, their voices crisp and professional as they coordinated operations across multiple fronts simultaneously. Admiral, thank you for allowing me to observe your operations, Yuna said formally. The Alliance Council is eager to understand your methods. Understanding our methods isn't difficult, Taiho replied, gesturing toward the main tactical display. We identify the enemy, we locate their weaknesses, and we exploit those weaknesses until they can no longer threaten innocent lives. What? Your people call ruthless. We call efficient. The display showed the current status of human operations across Vorthon-occupied territory. Unlike the Alliance's previous attempts at liberation, which focused on single targets and limited objectives, the humans were operating on multiple fronts simultaneously. Their fleet had split into task forces, each one capable of independent operations while maintaining perfect coordination with the others. The Vorthons have enslaved the populations of these worlds, Yuna explained, highlighting specific planets on the display. On Kepler 4-4 to be alone, they're holding over 2 million civilians in forced labor camps. Our previous liberation attempts failed because we tried to minimize casualties to both our forces and the enslaved populations. Admiral Taiho studied the intelligence data with the focused attention of a predator examining its prey. Your mistake was thinking you could fight a clean war against an enemy that doesn't recognize the concept of mercy. Colonel Kyung, report to the command center immediately. Within minutes, a woman in combat fatigues entered the room. Colonel Kyung was shorter, Then the Admiral but carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had seen real combat. Scars crossed her left cheek, and her eyes held the same calculating intensity as her commander. "Colonel, prepare the ground assault teams for simultaneous deployment to all 5 occupied worlds," Taiho ordered. "Full liberation protocols. Want every slave camp identified and secured within 72 hours? "Understood, sir," Kuhn replied. "Should we coordinate with Alliance ground forces?" "Alliance forces will provide humanitarian support and civilian evacuation once we've secured the operational areas. We don't have time to work around their limitations." Yuna felt a chill at the casual way they discussed what Alliance strategists considered the most complex military operation imaginable. "Admiral, liberating 5 worlds simultaneously requires enormous resources and coordination. Even our largest operations never attempted more than 1 planet at a time." "It's because you think like defenders," Taiho explained, pulling up detailed invasion plans on the holographic display. "You plan for acceptable losses and graduated objectives. We plan for total victory in the shortest possible time." The scale of the human operation was staggering. Massive dropships, each one larger than Alliance frigates, would deploy from orbit carrying entire mechanized divisions. Our support would be provided by fighters that moved faster than most Alliance interceptors while carrying enough firepower to level city blocks. Artillery units would establish fire bases within minutes of landing, creating overlapping fields of destruction that could eliminate any counterattack. "The key is overwhelming force applied with surgical precision," Colonel Kuhn added, highlighting specific target areas. "Don't give the enemy time to adapt or regroup. By the time they understand what's happening, it's already over." Captain G1, who had accompanied Yuna from the Alliance observation fleet, studied the invasion plans with growing amazement. This level of coordination requires communication systems far beyond anything we've developed. How do you maintain command and control across multiple planetary assaults? Every human soldier carries an integrated communications array linked to our fleet's quantum network, Taiho explained. Real-time battlefield data flows between individual troops, unit commanders, and fleet command. We can adjust tactics at the squad level based on intelligence gathered across the entire theater of operations. The first dropships launched 18 hours later. Yuna watched from the observation deck as hundreds of the massive vessels descended toward Kepler-4 for to be like metallic meteors. Each dropship carried 50 soldiers along with their vehicles, weapons, and supplies, enough firepower to overwhelm most planetary defense systems. "Major Nari, report your status." Colonel Kyung's voice crackled through the communications system as the first wave of troops hit the surface. Landing zone secured. Colonel Vorthon resistance was lighter than expected. Beginning, advance toward target objectives now. On the surface below, the human assault unfolded with mechanical precision. Soldiers moved in coordinated groups, their powered armor allowing them to cover ground faster than Vorthon defenders could respond. Captain Doyin's mechanized unit punched through enemy lines like they were made of paper, while Major Naris. Infantry teams secured key positions with surgical strikes. "Target acquired," came Captain Doyan's voice over the radio. "Slave compound Delta 7 in sight. Requesting permission to engage Vorthan guards." Permission granted. Rules of engagement are weapons free on all Vorsan military personnel. Protect civilian lives at all costs. Yuna watched through drone feeds as human forces surrounded the largest slave camp on the planet. The Vorthan guards, reptilian creatures, twice the size of humans, had established defensive positions around the perimeter. Their plasma weapons could cut through most Alliance armor, like it was cloth. The human attack lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Soldiers. Empowered armor moved through Vorthon defensive lines like ghosts, their weapon systems, targeting enemy positions with inhuman accuracy. Explosive charges eliminated guard towers while Special Forces teams secured the civilian areas. When the shooting stopped, every Vorthan guard was dead, and not a single civilian had been harmed. "Compound secured," Major Nari reported. 2,300 civilians ready for evacuation. Medical teams are treating the injured. Similar reports flooded in from across the planet. Human forces had struck simultaneously at dozens of locations, overwhelming Vorthan defenders before they could coordinate a response. Within 6 hours, every slave camp on Kepler 442b was in human hands. How do they fight like this? Captain Juan asked, watching the systematic destruction of Vorthan military installations across the planet's surface. This level of tactical coordination shouldn't be possible. Admiral Taiho overheard the question and turned from his command station. Captain, my species has been fighting wars for over 10,000 years. We've learned that half measures in combat only prolong suffering and increase casualties. When we commit to a fight, we commit everything necessary to end it quickly and completely. The liberation of Kepler 442b was completed within 24 hours. Across the other 4 occupied worlds, human forces achieved similar results with the same terrifying efficiency. Vorthan occupation forces that had held these planets for months were swept away in less than 3 days. As Yuna watched the final Vorthan ships fleeing the system, she realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The humans hadn't just answered the Alliance's call for help. It redefined what military power meant in the modern age. The age of limited warfare and acceptable losses was over. The age of total commitment had begun, the Vorthan homeworld. Of Zephyria had never known the sound of enemy engines in its atmosphere. For 300 years, this planet had been the beating heart of an empire that stretched across 47 star systems. Its orbital defense platforms could shatter moons, and its fleet was considered the most powerful force in the galaxy. Now those same defense platforms floated as twisted metal debris around the planet like a graveyard of broken dreams. The mighty Vorthan fleet, once numbering in the thousands, had been reduced to 17 damaged vessels hiding behind their world's largest moon. Emperor Vex stood at the massive viewport of his palace, watching human ships patrol the skies above his capital city. The Terran war fleet had arrived 3 days ago. The sight of 800 warships in perfect formation had broken something inside him that 3 centuries of conquest had never touched. "Your Majesty," his chief advisor whispered, approaching. "With trembling steps, the humans are requesting your presence for the surrender ceremony." Vex's eyes closed in defeat. 6 months ago, he had commanded the most feared military force in galactic history. His armies had crushed civilizations that had existed for millennia. Species with advanced technology and powerful fleets had fallen before Vorthan, might like wheat before a harvester. Then the humans had answered the Alliance's desperate call for help. The grand hall of the Vorthon Palace had hosted countless victory celebrations over the centuries. Conquered leaders had knelt before the Vorthan throne, while their worlds burned in the distance. Today, it would witness something that had never happened before: the surrender of the Vorthan Empire itself. Commander. Yuna entered the hall flanked by Captain Jiwan and a full honor guard of Alliance officers. She wore her dress uniform for the first time in months, the crisp blue fabric a stark contrast to the battle-worn fatigues she had lived in during the war. Behind them came Admiral Taiho and his senior staff, their black uniforms bearing the silver insignia of the Terran Defense Force. The hall fell silent as Emperor Vex approached the ceremonial table. Once he had stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian frame radiating the confidence of absolute power. Now he seemed smaller somehow, his scales dulled, and his movements careful like those of an old creature trying not to fall. "Emperor Vex," Admiral Taiho said formally, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "You stand before this assembly to formally surrender the Vorthon Empire and all its territories to the joint authority of the Kepler Alliance and the Terran Defense Force." The surrender documents lay spread across the polished metal table. Each page detailed the complete dismantling of Vorthan military power, the liberation of all enslaved populations, and the establishment of humanitarian oversight on every former Vorthan world. The terms were absolute and non-negotiable. "Your terms are harsh," Emperor Vex said, his voice barely above a whisper. His clawed hand shook as he reached for the signing stylus. Admiral Taiho's expression remained unchanged. "Your empire enslaved billions of sentient beings, Emperor. You turned entire civilizations into labor camps. Children were separated from their families and forced to work in mines until they died of exhaustion. The terms are not harsh. They are just... Commander Yuna watched as the most powerful being in the galaxy signed away everything his species had built over 3 centuries. Signature felt like the closing of a dark chapter in galactic history. She thought of Admiral Chen and the countless others who had died in the early days of the war. Before the humans arrived to turn the tide. "It is done," Emperor Vex said, setting down the stylus with a sound that echoed through the silent hall like the closing of a tomb. Colonel Kyung, Admiral Taiho, spoke into his communication device, began immediate humanitarian operations on all liberated worlds, full medical support and reconstruction assistance. As the formal ceremony concluded, the various dignitaries began to file out of the hall. Commander Yuna found herself walking beside Admiral Taiho toward the massive viewport that looked out over the Vorthan capital city. Human transport ships were already landing in the streets below, carrying medical supplies and construction equipment. Admiral Yuna said quietly, "When we sent that message to Earth 6 months ago, we expected a few patrol ships at most. Maybe some military advisors to help us plan better defensive strategies." Taiho nodded, his eyes following the movement of human ships in the sky above them. "What did you expect us to do, Commander? Send a token force that would accomplish nothing while billions of innocent people suffered?" "But your entire fleet," Yuna continued. 800 ships. Your whole military. You risked everything for species you had only known for a year." Admiral Taiho was quiet for a long moment, watching as human soldiers helped Vorthan. Civilians emerged from underground shelters where they had hidden during the final battle. Children who had never seen sunlight were taking their first steps into a world without fear. "Commander Yuna," he finally said, "humanity learned something during our long history of warfare. Half measures in defense of innocent life only guarantee that more innocent lives will be lost. When we give our word to protect people, we don't send backup. We send everything we have until the job is completely finished." That night, celebrations erupted across 47 star systems, on worlds that had known only slavery and oppression. For decades, people danced in streets that had been patrolled by armed guards just days before. Families separated by Vorthan labor policies were reunited for the first time in years. On Kepler 4-4 to be Ness' home world, children played games in parks that had been forced labor sites under Vorthan rule. The massive mining equipment that had scarred the landscape was being dismantled by human engineering teams and replaced with schools and hospitals. Captain Juan stood with Yuna on the observation deck of the Harmony's Edge, watching human reconstruction ships work through the night to repair the damage of decades of occupation. "Do you think this will last?" he asked. "This peace?" Yuna considered the question while watching a human medical ship deliver supplies to a refugee camp below. "Look at them, Jiwan. They could have simply destroyed the Vorthan Empire and left us to clean up the mess. Instead, they're staying to help rebuild. They're not just warriors, they're protectors." Across the galaxy, every species that had witnessed the human military campaign understood that the balance of power had shifted permanently. The humans had demonstrated something that no other civilization had ever managed: the ability to project overwhelming force across vast distances while maintaining absolute precision in their objectives. But more importantly, they had shown that their commitment to protecting innocent life was total and unwavering. When Earth gave its word, that word was backed by the full might of human civilization. The Rigel Accords, signed 3 weeks later, established new protocols for galactic security. Any species or empire that threatened civilian populations would face the combined response of the Alliance and Earth. The document was simple and direct. It's written in language that every civilization could understand. As Admiral Taiho prepared to return to Earth with half of the Terran war fleet, he met one final time with Commander Yuna at the Alliance headquarters on Proxima Station. "Will you be back?" she asked, watching human ships prepare for their journey home. "We'll always be here when you need us," Taiho replied. "But hopefully, after what happened to the Vorthans, you won't need us for a very long time." The human fleet departed in the same formation they had arrived in 6 months earlier, 800 ships moving as one through hyperspace toward their distant home. But 400 vessels remained, establishing permanent bases throughout. Alliance territory, as a reminder to anyone who might consider following the Vorthan path. The age of Vorthan terror was over, but something greater had begun. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations could look to the stars knowing that somewhere out there, humanity stood ready to defend those who could not defend themselves. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.